Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Rainmakers Roundup. I'm your host, Mark Iorio. I'm with Chris Mangano. Look at Chris. Look at how you doing, buddy?
Doing well. Thanks for having me.
Vice President of Sales and Marketing at Ocellus Tech.
Ocellus Tech, correct.
Cool. Tell us about it, man. It's Chris. It's funny. You and I have talked offline a bunch about cybersecurity and some of the threats out there and people not really understanding. You probably taught me more in an interview from over a year ago or about a year ago about cyber threats than anyone prior to you. Just conversationally talking about it. So tell us about Ocellus.
Permanent part of our landscape these days, unfortunately, for the cyber threat management work that we do. But Ocellus Tech is a division of an organization called Imperium. Mm-hmm. And Imperium was founded in 1993 by an individual named Ryan Smith, mm-hmm. who came up through the nonprofit world, understanding all of the challenges and work that needed to be done within nonprofits and some of the operational efficiencies that through the years he learned needed more attention than others, mm-hmm. and created Imperium to create economies of scale, mm-hmm. and a consortium and constellation system that allows nonprofits that participate in that model to leverage the different things that are now becoming available to them as part of their involvement. And it's grown tremendously from 1993 to where Ryan is today. It's a $200 million organization.
Wow.
Yeah, did a fabulous job and continuing to grow.
Yeah.
And Ocellus Tech was created because we were a pre-established group of IT professionals that had a proven model for delivering IT management, mm-hmm. both remotely as well as on site. Mm-hmm. And Ryan saw and recognized the importance of being able to meet the needs of his participating nonprofits in a way that would create those efficiencies as well. So, all of the other efficiencies that he's been able to deliver successfully through this model now expands very effectively into the delivery of IT management. And part of that is cyber threat management, which is a big part of what we do.
Yeah. So one of the things, Chris, that you and I talked about offline is that, as COVID-19 has kind of evolved and the pandemic has caused people to work from home, telecommute, what has changed in terms of cybersecurity, cyber threats, managed IT services over the last, say, 6 or 8 months?
Yeah, great question. So a lot of things began to take more formal shape a few years ago. In March of 2017, Governor Cuomo in New York created something called the DFS, Department of Financial Services, DFS 500 regulations. Mm-hmm. So if you're an institution, an organization, predominantly in the financial sector, but it goes far beyond that, and you operate in any capacity out of New York, mm-hmm. you're governed by the DFS 500 regulations. So this affects, obviously, credit unions, lending institutions, banks, financial advisory groups, but it's also charitable foundations, a number of government institutions. There are other vertical sectors and markets that are affected by this. So sure. DFS 500 basically makes it mandatory now. It's no longer a choice where if you're the custodian or guardian of data, mm-hmm. and it's your responsibility to manage that data responsibly, you are required in New York under DFS 500 to have an annual security risk assessment, mm-hmm. also have an annual pen test, which is a penetration test, and the results of that cannot be reported out to the board of directors or the governing body of that organization. It must be reported out by a garden variety officer, operations officer, or CFO.
Okay.
It must be reported out by chief information security officer, what's called a CISO. Mm-hmm. Most organizations don't have a CISO laying around on staff. It's a very coveted and difficult position to maintain in today's cyber threat world. So organizations generally are aligning themselves with groups like us to help assist in developing cyber threat management policy. So what we've seen with the DFS 500 regulation is other markets, other sectors are learning from what Governor Cuomo put into place for these areas, and things like manufacturing, legal, healthcare, and especially education are making it mandatory now. So, K through 12 is a big threat sector. FERPA, which is the Family Education Rights Privacy Act, is changing and evolving just like the DFS 500. FERPA is beginning to recognize that schools can no longer do best effort to manage cyber threat policies and procedures. They are going to be held to the same standards similar to what I just described the DFS 500 involving.
Yeah. So talk a little bit more about FERPA and the whole idea of the security threats in K-12, Chris, because I don't think, for the viewing audience, parents out there realize, parents, teachers, administrators realize how that threat could affect their children.
Sure. Well, just yesterday, the city of Hartford fell under attack. Actually, the attack was launched over this past Labor Day holiday weekend. Ransomware was successfully deployed, detonated, and prevented the city of Hartford from opening yesterday remotely. Most of the city of Hartford schools were scheduled to go live first day of school yesterday with telecommuting, distance learning, and they were not able to do that because of a successful breach on the part of the threat actors over this Labor Day weekend. So the distance learning and in general, businesses of all areas, sectors, and markets that are now working remotely through WebEx and Zoom and Microsoft Teams and the various tools that are out there that are allowing us to do this. It's wonderful to be able to do that and work remotely, but it opens a whole new slew of doors for the threat actors and the folks that are behaving nefariously to do things that they were doing before, but now they have a whole new layer of being able to compromise your environment. So K through 12, this is not new. City of Hartford just yesterday, but there have been countless organizations, schools throughout the country, and in New Jersey specifically, that have fell victim to a variety of different types of attacks. We support the New Jersey School Board Association, which anchors 584 public school districts in the state of New Jersey. Okay. And the New Jersey School Board Association, as the agency of record managing their IT and assisting with cyber threat management, we've been able to now help and assist a number of different schools throughout New Jersey to develop and advance internal controls, policies, and procedures and help them lock down their environment. The city of Hartford was able to respond. They are now open today. They missed one day, and the reason they missed only one day was because they invested 1 year ago over $500,000 in a cyber threat management program that put in place various tools that allowed them to catch, isolate, and contain this threat that just was launched over this past holiday weekend.
That's great.
Yeah, and they were able to correct it rather quickly within a few days, working through the weekend, and today they're open for the students to be able to go to school or be in their living room.
Did they end up paying them ransomware, or don't you know?
It's unknown for certain, but
I don't think they make that stuff public.
No, they don't make it public, and the short answer is no. They generally don't pay, and especially if you have a threat management, a cyber threat management set of tools in place that allows you to forensically look back. Digital forensics is a big part of how did this happen? Right. When and how did the breach occur? Can we isolate it? can we then do a restore of data to bring us back to just before the moment of compromise?
Right.
And that was what they were able to do.
Great.
Yeah.
You know, Chris, before we went on the air, one of the questions I was asking you is, do people understand, when you talk about Microsoft Teams and Zoom and WebEx and everything else, understand how some of the data that they're transmitting back and forth, forget the video conferencing and all that stuff, that's one thing. But transmitting data or files back and forth, do they realize how, if they're at home, that an organization, large, small, and you mentioned this to me several months ago, that small businesses need to develop a plan of action, a risk mitigation plan, a cyber risk management plan. And a lot of times they don't do that. They don't come up with a plan until it's too late.
Yeah, it's unfortunate that oftentimes it won't happen to me is the mindset. And this is not really, cyber threat management controls and policies, procedures, advancement is not insurance. Insurance, that is optional. We've often said, well, I'll take my chances, and chances are it won't happen to me, my organization, my school district. But in today's day and age, it isn't a question of if, but when you will be compromised, because the advancements on the threat actors side of the line are becoming more and more advanced, and oftentimes the bad guys are a step or two ahead of the good guys. Sure. And listen, the FBI and a number of other organizations are regularly recruiting and trying to bring in sometimes some of the most notorious criminals that have actually flipped over to the good side.
The white hats.
Sure, we've got the Death Star and going back to Star Wars and George Lucas, right?
Exactly.
So, but the telecommuting, the distance learning, if it's a school setting, if you're working remotely through WebEx, through Zoom, through Microsoft Teams, that tool and platform is allowing you to present yourself to your colleagues and to your clients through solid audio and video content, but you've also you also have to think about the work that you're doing file-wise, data-wise, and as you pointed out a few minutes ago, transmitting that data through either a virtual private network, whatever. We won't go into the weeds over the different models that allow that to happen, but having in place a solid mechanism and IT architecture that is modeled out properly is critical today. It's critical.
Yeah. We're going to have to take a quick commercial break. When we come back, I want to talk to you about how to start a planning process. And we'll get into some other stuff with Chris. But, this is your Vice President of Sales and Marketing at Ocellus. It seems to me that it's not a sales process anymore. It's a learning process. People have to understand and become more knowledgeable about this, as I have over the last year, because I've been talking to you about this.
Absolutely.
And get a plan in place. So right after the commercial break, we'll come back and talk about a plan. We'll be right back after a message from our sponsors. Welcome back to Rainmakers Roundup. I'm your host, Mark Iorio. I'm with Chris Mangano. Chris is the Vice President of Sales and Marketing at Ocellus. You had a long history in IT, and you started in 1986, right? It's a long time, man. 34 years. Don't tell anyone. You
tell
look good.
anybody.
You look the same.
Mark and I have known each other a long time.
Long time.
Yeah.
But it's changed a lot, hasn't it, man? It's just amazing how the business has evolved. And
Yeah, it's crazy. So we'll go down briefly the communication road. In the 80s, 1G was the mode of mobile communication, right?
yeah,
The 90s was 2G, okay? From 2000 to 2010, we were in 3G, and Steve Jobs stood up in front of the world in 2007 and held up the very first iPhone, which revolutionized and changed the world. And we were able to surf and browse online and walk around essentially with very powerful computers in the palm of our hand in our pockets through up until 2010. 3G allowed us to do an awful lot. And then from 2010 to 2020, where we are today, that's been the 4G ride. So these iterations of generations of mobile communication are decade measurements, okay? So we're now entering 5G. 5G's here. Cities throughout the world are building out 5G infrastructure, and it's just an absolute game changer because the changes, I think everyone watching and listening can agree, you can agree, Mark, that 3G to 4G, there were some significant things that improved, but essentially 4G gave us the ability to do the same things we were doing with 3G, but just better, faster, smoother, transfer speeds, watching videos, enjoying music, communicating more effectively through the messaging platforms and social media that became, so prevalent. But now 5G, literally, advertisements are on the airwaves now that Verizon touts 25 times faster than 4G. In reality, the architecture is engineered to be over 100 times faster.
Wow.
So, the brief example that I always like to tell a story around is, and this has been proven now, a top-level surgeon, perhaps in New York, through 5G wireless data transfers can control a robotic arm in a surgical tent in the middle of a Afghanistan war field and operate on a soldier remotely from the United States, controlling a robotic arm, all through the advancements in the speed transfer of what 5G is going to be able to deliver, which is absolutely remarkable. The latency, which is what is a little bit of a pain for some of us with skipping videos and slowing content down. And 4G is about 50 to 100 milliseconds. With 5G, it's as close to 1 millisecond as you can get.
Wow.
Which allows things like a robotic arm being inside of you, controlled by a surgeon halfway around the world, to happen. And I don't think either one of us would want that going on without that kind of speed.
Not at all. Not at all. Wow, you're right, that is fascinating. I mean, think about 5G, a lot of people think about the fact that, it's the Internet of Things and you can connect pretty much everything that has a chip in it, a computer chip or a wireless chip in it. And but it's remarkable what industries, what businesses will be impacted by 5G.
And 5G opens the door to threats, going back to cyber threat management, cyber threat advisory, and organizations doing more to control their world. 5G is going to be and is remarkable, and 6G is already developed and really positioned to launch. And by the way, the intervals are no longer going to be 10 years. That will accelerate, and you'll see a graduation to the next generation of speed and transfer inside that 10-year rotation that we've had. But Internet of Things, listen, we all have become rather dependent on these devices that we can talk to, that we can ask anything of. We have them in our homes. We have them, obviously, the mobile phone itself is Siri or Google if you're Android, and at home you have perhaps a Nest or an Alexa, and we're asking constantly for facts and information and research, and we're investigating, and your digital footprint which is your identity in the ecosphere of, the cyber world, is exponentially growing by the second, literally by the second, because everything you do, everything you investigate, research, shop for, is documented and becomes part of the big data bucket of your identity. Which is, just amazing.
It is. So before the break, I wanted to talk to you about how you go about the process of putting a plan together for risk mitigation for cyber threats.
Okay, so generally speaking, it starts with a cyber risk assessment. A risk assessment centered on cyber controls is different than a garden variety technology assessment that's looking at your servers and switches and firewall. All of that, of course, is accounted for in a cyber risk assessment, but more specifically, cyber risk assessment is broken down into 7 layers consisting of, host and data and applications, people. All of these things are evaluated. So it used to be when we would come in and do a technology review, we would sit down with the individual who was most familiar with technology. If your organization, Mark Iorio Enterprises, has a chief technology officer or a senior network administrator, that was the individual, the guy or gal that we wanted to talk to.
Right.
Cyber risk assessment involves a whole board of people. We are talking to human resources, we're talking to director of finance, we're talking to executive director, IT, because all of the areas that touch your business affect cyber risk planning. So that cyber risk assessment is step 1. Step 2, generally the findings that we develop are presented, the gap analysis is reviewed, and things need to change and improve in the areas that we've identified need attention. So usually internal controls, policies, and procedures need to be, in almost all cases, updated to become in alignment with the developing regulations and laws that are changing and evolving. So internal control policy procedure updates are generally performed, and in kind of a step 3, many organizations enroll in what's called MDR, Managed Detection Response, which is a set of tools that gets installed within an environment, does a persistent real-time scan 365 days a year, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, right? We're looking at any anomaly, any breach through normal performance thresholds is immediately isolated, and any threat that is attempting to be detonated or launched or advanced can be contained, much like the city of Hartford spending $500,000 a year ago containing. That was a contained event. That could have been a lot worse.
Oh gosh,
a lot worse.
Chris, talk about what happens if an organization gets compromised. If again, last time you and I sat on the set, we were talking about ransomware and malware, and I don't think people don't understand how bad it could be. What happens when an organization gets compromised? What do they do?
So generally speaking, there are 2 possible outcomes. If you don't have internal controls, policies, and procedures that have been specifically developed around cyber threat management, meaning you don't have that MDR, that Managed Detection Response, that can look back at the event logs. Event logs are things that are very boring. Most people don't want to look at event logs because it's literally hundreds of thousands, millions of lines of events that happen all day, every day within an environment. Every time something happens, in terms of computing, creating, saving, retrieving, archiving, event logs are created around that, okay? If you don't have an MDR program, Managed Detection Response, you're going to find it very difficult to go back, if you are compromised, and isolate and determine how this occurred.
Right.
If you do have controls in place, you can go back through the use of these advanced tools and isolate within the event logs exactly how, when, and where, down to the actual device, the edge device, the computer, the individual user that perhaps clicked on something or went and did something that they weren't supposed to do, not in an effort to try to obviously embarrass that individual. But forensically, digital forensics is a huge part of the next step if you are compromised. Another big part of what needs to happen is knowing who, by law, depending on the regulation that we're talking about that governs your area, who do you have to notify? Because this is now a requirement. This is a law, especially again with DFS 500 in New York. Immediate notification must be distributed to a variety of different folks within your universe. So depending on the market or area or sector that you operate within, those could be clients, those could be strategic business partners, those could be suppliers within the chain that keeps your lights on and your doors open. So all of those people need to be properly notified, and if you're not notifying them within the mandated window of time, which is generally 3 days, a 72-hour period, you are subject to significant penalties and fines.
Yeah. You know, we're coming to the end of the show. It goes by so quickly, and you've got such an amazing amount of knowledge and the time that you've put into this over the last 30 years. It's just remarkable to me, Chris. I think people out there do not realize that they're not protected if they have like a Microsoft Office package, 365 or something like that. But your target audience, small, mid, and large businesses?
Yes, absolutely. The managed IT work that we do in helping organizations just do day-to-day administration of the help desk tickets, updates, firmware, things of that nature continues to be part of what we do. But the cyber threat management discipline involves an entirely separate set of professionals. You have network engineers that do the day-to-day IT administration and caring for and maintaining and updating those environments for clients. Cyber threat management team, different set of professionals altogether that have skills and certifications in that realm. And you need to, if you're entering into this and thinking about working with an organization that says they can help you with cyber threat management, then just make sure that they do have that group that is qualified, because it's not a network engineer, it is a cyber threat advisor, professional, a CISO, a Chief Information Security Officer.
Awesome. Thank you. It's been awesome. Tell everybody how to get in touch with you and Ocellus, please.
So I believe we have, I don't know, perhaps up on the screen, but Ocellus Tech is the organization, and my email is cmangano, Mangano, @ocellustech.com, and you can also go to the Ocellus Tech website and contact me that way.
Awesome. That's it. That's a wrap for Rainmakers Roundup. Thanks, Chris. That was wonderful. It's amazing how much knowledge you have, and you're like a teacher out there.
I appreciate being
here.
here.
You're welcome. We'll see you next time on Rainmakers Roundup, everyone. Have a great week. Be safe.